All right, so today's lesson is lesson 3.4. You can find that in your student journal we're going to use for your notes, and we're going to be graphing in standard form today. So we're going to start off with some vocabulary. So the first vocabulary piece that we want to look at is standard form. So in standard form, we're going to write out our equation like this: ax plus by equals c. And a note for you is when we use this, the a, b, and c are all numbers. So a and b will be coefficients for us, c will be a constant, x and y will always remain as x and y for our purposes when writing in standard form. So the next thing that we're going to talk about then are our x and y intercepts, which are going to be our key ideas for today. And so the x-intercept is the point where a graph intersects the x-axis. Okay, to help us view that, if we draw a line on a graph, in this case right here, our x-intercept will be at this place. So we can always expect for an x-intercept to show up as x, and then the y part of it to be at 0. Similarly, when we talk about a y-intercept, it's the point where a line intersects the y-axis. And so again, if we were to look at this example we've drawn up here, you could see this point right here is where we intersect the y-axis, and so that would be our y-intercept. This will always happen at a point like this, 0, y. Okay, so those are the main ideas of our vocabulary that we will be using today. Additionally, a few notes we want to take some time on are first when we see an equation where we have y equals something. In this case, we'll call it b. And in this situation, the only part we have is a y equals something. So this is going to give us a y-intercept. And so we would put that point on our graph. And then since that's the only point we have in order to draw a line, we'll draw it straight through that point. So when you see y equals something, it will come out as a horizontal line. In the same way, when we see an equation like this, x equals some kind of number, we'll start by going to our x-intercept, so finding that spot on our x-axis. And then in order to create a line, we go and draw a vertical line through that point. So whenever you see x equals, it will come back as a vertical line. Whenever you see y equals a number, it will come back as a horizontal line. One thing that I remember to help me with this is I start by plotting the point that I'm given. So in the example of the y-intercept, we put that on our graph, and then we ask ourselves, am I trying to create a new line? So do I need it to go horizontally to create a new line, or do I need to draw it vertically, which would simply give me back the y-axis? And because I'm trying to create a new line, I know I need to go horizontally. The same idea works over here. After I plot my x-intercept, I ask myself, am I trying to make horizontal line, which would just be the x-axis, or am I trying to create a new line? Since I'm trying to create a new line, the only way to make that is to draw something vertically. So the final part we'll talk through then before we do some examples is how we actually use our x and y intercepts to graph in standard form. So as we talked about previously, the x-intercept of a graph is the x-coordinate where it crosses the x-axis. And we see always on our x-intercept that y equals 0. Similarly, as we talked about, the y-intercept is where our graph crosses the y-axis. And in this case, x equals 0. So our main idea when it comes to graphing then is in order to find out our x and y intercepts, we can plug in zeros. So if I want to find my x-intercept, I'm going to plug in y equals 0. See that for the first step right here. Similarly, we'll do that same process to find our y-intercept. To find our y-intercept, we'll plug in x equals 0. Okay, so we'll take a look at how that will play out for us in just a moment. But now let's get to graphing some. Okay, so the first one we look at gives us y equals -3. So right away we are given a y-intercept. So the first thing I do is I go on my graph to the y-intercept of -3. And I plot my point right there. Then I have to ask myself again, okay, do I have any x-intercepts, any other information? Our answer would be no. And so do I want the y-axis for my line, or am I trying to create a new line? And so in order to show that all of the y's are going to be at -3, I draw in a horizontal line. Similarly, in the next example we look, the first thing it tells us is that we have an x-intercept of 2. So we go on our x-axis to 2, we make a point, and now we ask ourselves again, okay, is it going to go horizontal? Well, no, that would just be our x-axis, so that doesn't make any sense. So we need to draw a vertical line. So anytime you see x equals as our only part, we will end up vertical. Whenever we simply see y equals, we will end up horizontal. Okay, so for the next few examples now, we're going to work on finding our x and y intercepts. So I want you to notice I've skipped number 3 just so you've got some more space in your student journal. But it's asking us to find the x and y intercept for each. So the first thing that we are going to do, if we want to find our x-intercept, we have to remember that we're using the idea y equals 0. And so in our equation here, -x minus 4y equals 16, my first step is to replace the y right here with 0. So when you do that, you'll see this portion right here related to the y cancel out. So we'll have left -x equals 16. So then, because this is like a -1 in front, we divide both sides by -1, resulting in an x-intercept of -16. Or we know that means a point at -16, 0. Similarly then, we want to go and find the y-intercept for this one. So for the y-intercept, we know that x equals 0. So I'm going to go back to my equation and plug that in. -0 minus 4y equals 16. This portion right here of -0 doesn't make a difference, positive or negative on 0. That will go away. So we have -4y equals 16. And now we divide both sides by -4, resulting in a y-intercept of -4. So our second point, our y-intercept, would be at 0, -4. And so as you'll see in a little bit, with 2 points now, we would be able to take that and put it on a graph. All right, so we'll keep going then with number 5. Same idea. X-intercept, we know tells us y has to equal 0. Y-intercept tells us that x has to equal 0. So why don't you take a moment right now to try that one out, and then we'll show you the answers up here on the board. All right, so you can see in our process over here, we started by substituting in 0 to the spots we needed to. Then those zeros made those portions cancel out, divided through the places that we needed to, and so you should have ended up with an x-intercept of -6, a y-intercept of positive 15. If you didn't get that part, go ahead and go back through, rewind the video, and watch this first portion over here again to help you out. All right, so now that we've got that main idea of finding our x and y intercepts, we're going to take it and put it to the graph. So I'll go through number 6, and then we'll invite you to do number 7. So to find our x-intercept, we know we start by plugging in y equals 0. So we're going to take our equation, -8x plus 12 times 0 equals 24. This part will cancel out, so -8x equals 24. We divide both sides by -8. And y equals -3. So we know we have a y-intercept at -3. So we're going to go over to our graph, and at -3, put in a point. Okay, now we'll go back and we'll do the y-intercept. That was my x-intercept. I lost that right there. So this is our x-intercept. Wrote that wrong. So we've got -3, 0. Make sure you fix that in your notes. So at -3, we'll put that on the graph. So now we'll go back and do our y-intercept, where we know x equals 0. So in place of x, we plug in 0, so -8 times 0 plus 12y equals 24. Part with 0 is going to cancel out, so 12y equals 24. Divide both sides by 12, and y equals 2, telling us our y-intercept is at the point 0, 2. Put that on our graph. And so finally, now that we have our x and y intercepts, we've got 2 points, so we can simply go back through and graph that line. Okay, so you've seen now how to pick out your x and y intercepts, solve for those 3 times, and now once you've got them solved, we're simply going to put those points on the graph. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video and try out number 7. We'll show you what that should look like for your answer in just a moment. All right, so go ahead and take a moment to check it out. You should see x-intercept, you plug in 0 for y. Solve it out. Your x-intercept should be at 2. Similarly, on the y-intercept, we plug in 0 for x. Solve it out. Y equals 4. So we see up here a y-intercept at 4. All right, finally, our last one we're going to look at is number 8. And so on example 8, it tells us that school band is selling sweatshirts and baseball caps to raise $9,000. Sweatshirts cost $25 each. Baseball caps cost $10 each. Here is our equation, 25x plus 10y equals 9,000. X is the number of sweatshirts. Y is the number of baseball caps. So it's asking us first to find out our x and y intercepts, and then say what they mean. Okay, so let's start by our x-intercept right here. We know when we do that, y equals 0. So we're going to do 25x plus 10 times 0 equals 9,000. 25x equals 9,000. When you solve that out, you should end up with 360. Okay, so let's break down for a second what that one means. If it says x equals 360, x was talking about our number of sweatshirts. So 360 sweatshirts. And at that same point, y was 0. So that would mean and 0 caps. Okay, similarly, we can go back and we can figure out our y-intercept. So y-intercept, we've got x equals 0. So we'll do 25 times 0 plus 10y equals 9,000. When we do that, 10y equals 9,000. Divide that out, and y equals 900. So we want to go back and make sense of that. We've got the point 0, 900. 0x means 0 sweatshirts and 900 caps. So when we're thinking about it, our extremes are selling 900 caps and 0 sweatshirts. We're selling 360 sweatshirts and 0 caps. So for the moment, I'm going to go ahead down to our graph, and then we'll come back to part B in just a second. But since we've got these 2 points, let's go ahead and use them. I'm going to encourage you also to count by, I think we're going to go by hundreds on our graph. So we'll go 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. And we'll do the same going up. All right, so we know that we've got 1 point for our y-intercept that was at 900. And we've got for our sweatshirts 360, 0. So somewhere between the 300 and 400, leaning just a little bit closer to the 400, we would put our x-intercept. All right, so that's the first part of part C. We'll come back and talk about this second part in just a second, because part B and this part here, the second part, are very closely related. All right, so in part B now, it asks us to figure out some specific values. It says, figure out how many baseball caps need to be sold if 258 sweatshirts are sold. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that same equation, 25x plus 10y equals 9,000. And this time, because it's telling us 258 sweatshirts, we go back and say, okay, where do we need to plug it in for? Okay, well, x is the number of sweatshirts. So in place of x, we're going to plug in 258. Okay, and when we multiply these, 25 times 258, we find out that that's $6,450 that have come from selling sweatshirts. Okay, then we continue on solving our equation. So we'll subtract 6,450 from each side. 10y equals 2,550. We divide by 10, and y equals 255. So what it tells us is when we sell 258 sweatshirts, in order to make it to $9,000, we can plug that in, we would still need to sell 255 baseball caps. So the great thing about a function, which is the focus of our whole unit, is with our equation for our function, we can pick out all the different values, all the different combinations that could happen. And the way that it all comes together is on the graph. And so while our graph is imperfect, that it's can be difficult to tell exact detailed information, we're going to make some good estimates. And so I'm just going to pick out a couple of points that are on my graph, and we'll use them to help us estimate what we think some combinations could be. So while my graph might not be perfectly straight, let's just pick out some approximate points here. So it looks like on my graph that there's a point pretty close to 300 for the x, 200 for the y. So that means a possible solution to make 9,000 might be to sell 300 sweatshirts and 200 caps. Now, if you wanted to, you could go back and plug these numbers in for x and y and see if they work out. If we knew that our line was perfect in every way and we could pick out the exact numbers from looking at the detailed graph, we could get an exact answer. But from our graph where we're counting by hundreds, that can be a bit more difficult. One other spot that looks possible is it looks like pretty close here to 200 or a little over from 200 and 400. So we could approximate that maybe 210 for the X. So 210 sweatshirts and around 400 caps might be a combination to get us there. Again, the more detailed our graph can be, so the smaller the intervals can be, the better we can make decisions about these. But given the restrictions of our graph here, we cannot get all the details. If you went to Desmos and typed this into your Desmos.com graphing calculator, you could pick out exact combinations that would tell you specifically exact numbers that are going to work out to give us 900. These are some good estimations based off of the graph that we have. So if you have any questions from the video, please feel free to email your teacher or rewind the video, go back and watch some parts that we've talked about again. But the big ideas for today are, again, picking out your x-intercept. We need y to equal 0. Picking out our y-intercept, we need x to be 0. And then once you've got both of those points, you can put them on your graphs and then make a line from it.